When I was 16, my life took a turn that would leave an indelible mark on me for 2 decades. My parents, Gerald and Denise, were staunch advocates of what they termed tough love. They believed that the best way to prepare me for the harsh realities of life was through lessons steeped in discipline and hardship. Their methods were peculiar and often seemed more punitive than educational. They would wake me at odd hours to complete chores I had neglected, making me walk to school in inclement weather as a way to instill resilience. Their unyielding approach to parenting left me in a constant state of confusion and resentment, and I often felt more like a soldier in training than a child in a nurturing environment. But nothing could have prepared me for that fateful July morning that would alter my life's trajectory forever. We were returning home from a visit to my sister, Sabrina, at her college, located about 4 hours away. I was slouched in the back seat, half asleep and lost in the music from my iPod, when my father suddenly decided we needed to stop for gas at a desolate station off I-95. It was the kind of place that felt isolated and eerie, with flickering lights and an empty parking lot that seemed to stretch endlessly. Reluctantly, I got out to fetch him a coffee, still groggy and unaware of the life-altering moment that awaited me. As I returned to the parking lot, a chill ran through me as I scanned the area and realized our old Camry had vanished into the distance. My heart sank, and a wave of panic washed over me. At first, I thought they had simply moved to another pump, but then my phone buzzed with a text from my mother that shattered that hope into a million pieces. It read, "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem-solving." Standing there, alone with a cold cup of coffee in my hand and the weight of betrayal heavy in my chest, marked the beginning of a significant shift in my life. Up until that point, I had endured my parents' extreme parenting methods with a mix of confusion and resentment, but now, something inside me snapped. The moment crystallized in my mind. I was done. I had saved up about $140 for my summer job at the local pool, and with my backpack still in the car, I made a decision that would change everything. I asked the cashier for directions to the nearest bus station and called my Aunt Lola, my mother's sister, who had been estranged from my parents for reasons I only vaguely understood. Within hours, I found myself on a bus, heading toward a new life, leaving behind a childhood filled with emotional manipulation and cruel lessons. My parents had made their choice, and now I was finally making mine. The journey was liberating, albeit tinged with uncertainty. I spent the next 2 decades carving out a life for myself, earning my GED, starting a construction business, and eventually creating a family of my own. I never looked back, believing that chapter of my life was firmly closed. However, life has a peculiar way of resurfacing the past when you least expect it. Just yesterday, my office phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 20 years. My heart raced as I noticed 39 missed calls, mostly from numbers I didn't recognize. Among them were 3 calls from Sabrina, who I hadn't spoken to since I left. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I listened to her first voicemail, which was heartbreaking. She was in tears, pleading for me to call back because our parents had found me and were spiraling out of control. Sabrina explained that they were on the verge of losing their house due to my father's gambling addiction and my mother's shopping compulsion. Somehow, they had tracked down my company website and expected me to help them with $50,000 to avoid foreclosure. As I sat across from her at Denny's the next morning, I could see the remnants of the girl I once knew, but she was now visibly shaken, her face a canvas of distress. I listened to her story, feeling an unsettling mix of pity and anger swirling within me, but I remained resolute in my decision. I told her firmly that I would not be their solution. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from my parents, filled with guilt trips and demands that echoed the emotional manipulation of my childhood. I realized that they had not changed, their tactics were still their weapon of choice. After our conversation, I decided it was time for action. I had spent years healing from their abuse, and now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Using my connections, I discovered that their mortgage was owned by a bank I had previously worked with, and they were already 3 months behind on payments. In a moment of clarity and determination, I made arrangements to buy their mortgage debt at auction, legally acquiring the property they had taken for granted. When they walked into my office, I was prepared for them. I recorded our conversation, urging them to state their business or leave, and I watched as the truth unraveled before my eyes. They needed $175,000 to save their house, but I had no sympathy left for them. I revealed that I had already purchased their mortgage and that they had 30 days to vacate the premises. The shock on their faces was astonishing. They had come expecting to manipulate me into helping them, But instead, they were confronted with the harsh reality of their own making. As security escorted them out of my office, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. I had spent years building my life from the ground up, and now it was time for them to confront the consequences of their choices. But I wasn't finished yet. I had meticulously documented everything. Old birthday cards, text messages, and even recordings of their past abuse, including the infamous prank at the gas station. I shared this information with our extended family, unmasking the truth about my upbringing and how I had been portrayed as the problem child for far too long. The aftermath was explosive. My parents, desperate and disoriented, attempted to rally relatives against me, only to find that their stories had crumbled under scrutiny. Most family members remembered the cries of a child they had heard at night and were horrified by my parents' actions. I watched from a distance as my childhood home was demolished, a symbolic act that felt more liberating than vindictive. After the debris settled, I decided to turn that land into something meaningful: affordable housing for single parents and their children, naming it Annabelle Haven in honor of my aunt, who had taken me in when I needed it most. As the bulldozer tore through the property, I felt the weight of 20 years lift off my shoulders. I was no longer that scared, vulnerable teenager. I had transformed into a man who had built a life from nothing and was now ready to help others escape the cycle of abuse. In the end, I chose not to enact revenge for the sake of vengeance, but rather to reclaim my narrative and create something positive from the ashes of my past. I realized that sometimes, the best way to heal is to turn pain into purpose, and that's exactly what I did.